agree with it, I'm rebutting your decision, and I wish you to reconsider. Now, the majority of editors actually do take this seriously. And they say, okay, this is something that most of the time we get it right, sometimes we don't. And if it's a single editor journal, they will tend to ask one of the senior board members to look at the paper. If it's a multiple editor journal, often they'll ask another of the editors to look at the paper and to see if the rebuttal is sound. Sometimes it even needs to go out for another set of peer review process to see if that particular two referees chosen by that first editor were giving the wrong picture. It's just people with skills judging your paper. Sometimes they get it right, not always. So if you do ever get that situation where you do feel, that's wrong, I'm sure I did everything that was asked, I'm sure that somehow it's gone wrong here, please, if you feel strongly about it and you feel in the right, do not get, again, you can get privately angry, but not publicly angry. Write your formal rebuttal letter to the editor about the decision and explain why, in a few sentences, why you feel that the rejection was inappropriate. More often than not, there'll be an extra process. If it does work and you get your paper accepted, great. If it doesn't, when you've had another try, it's been worth it. And if the editor says, unfortunate, it's only cost you a letter. So it's certainly worth your while to consider that extra step before moving on to the next journal. You've invested so much time in this journal, in that particular structure of paper to match that guide to authors, that it's worthwhile that extra step. All right, that's something. And remember that some people do not see the referee's job as we, the publisher, see the referee's job. We see the referee's job as twofold. One is to act as a guardian of the quality, and secondly is to act as a distant friend, meaning that person helps you, the author, make your paper better. By making the paper better, you get accepted, you get more citations, more downloads. The author benefits, the readers benefit, because they get a better paper to read. And that's the job of the referee. Sometimes referees forget that. Sometimes they can be blunt, unhelpful, and so on. So in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to go through how to be a perfect reviewer. And I encourage all of you to think about being reviewers if you're not already. How do you start to be a reviewer? You can volunteer, and some journals will accept volunteers because you sometimes be added as the third person to see if your judgment on the paper is similar to the two people the editor has chosen. And if that works out, you get added to the list of referees. So, are there any other questions from this morning? We didn't have much time before. We had to rush off for lunch before. After this reviewer session, we'll have a longer time for questions and answers, of course. But, no? Okay, great. So, moving on. You suddenly have to change your mindset from being an author, trying to persuade a referee your paper is wonderful, to suddenly you change position. You now suddenly are the reviewer, receiving the paper and you're being asked to judge it, to help to do a quality control check, or whatever it's called. So, for some of you, it might already be here. If not, it might be a few months or a few years. But it's certainly important to realise that it's a useful thing for you to do, but also it's good fun. So it's an interesting combination. So the question is, which I think we already know the answer, why is peer review a part of the scholarly publishing process? And of course, the history of peer review and what it serves is important. And why you should be a reviewer, I talked a bit about. And of course, then how do you do a review? So it first started about 300 years ago. There was this journal here, the first journal, Philosophical Transaction. And that was 1600 something, and it's what they did is they sent around a manuscript by mail to various people who commented about it and sent it back to the editor, and then the author changed it, and then when it was okay, it was accepted, and that was the first peer-reviewed journal. And since then, of course, the vast amount of scientific journals are peer-reviewed. It's a slight difference in look, perhaps, but it's the same concept. And of course, it has the two functions, as I said. It acts as the filter, making sure that only the valid science gets published, the significant. And also, the idea is to improve the quality by giving suggestions to make that paper better. And think of it as your pre-submission, the peer review process for the reviewers, production, publication, and so on. And so that's the area we're talking about now. You've got as we talked about very briefly before lunch, the single blind peer review is the normal one. That's where the authors do not know the identities of the referees, except to know that they are the best people the editor can find. You have the double-blind peer review, and that's used, for example, in economics, whereby the referees do not know, officially, do not know the names of the authors. Often you can tell from what they're writing about and from their citations, their references, but the idea is the stuff is blind. Then you have open peer review, whereby the comments of the referees are included online as part of the development of the whole process. And then we have, of course, some other things, experimental peer review. Here, post-publication. After it's been published, people can comment, almost like a blog, and comment upon this. And that's been tried out with some areas. I know one of the Nature publications tried it and stopped it. So I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of different experiments in the future. And of course, in physics, you have the preprint server, which has been around a long time. And of course, the role of reviewers is to protect, preserve quality and science. We as publishers have to stand back. We have to guarantee independence. So that's why there was even a case about 4 years ago, a Canadian society tried to interfere with the Canadian Society Journal editor in the process of the peer review. And the editor felt that's inappropriate, and in the end, the Canadian Science Research Council reprimanded, told off the society, the Canadian Society, saying they must not interfere with peer review because they owned the journal. They have no right to interfere with peer review. So my job is difficult. My job is to watch it happening around me and hope it goes right. The most important job of a publisher is to pick the next editor. So we select the editor-in-chief, and then we determine when the old one will retire or step down or hand across. So we monitor what goes on, we do all of our tracking, we do not get involved in the peer review. But we are very keen observers. But to us, the peer review is the added value of our publications. So the authors have to trust the peer review process helps them, and the editors have to trust that the reviewers are doing a good job. So that's an interesting balance of sometimes conflict of interest, sometimes integrity. In general, it works well. As I said, we don't have anything better so far. So the purpose is to make sure there's no mistakes, that it's logical, and the results seem to support what's going on. And also, often the reviewers know what's going on in terms of the quality of the work. They know this previous work been published, and so therefore make sure that it's not been repeated. It's original, but based on reasonable references. So in this whole publishing process, as I said, we have a lot of these referee reports happening. 300,000 reviewers we deal with. That's a lot. And so we have a pretty good idea of what goes right and what goes wrong. And who does it? It's everyone who's a scientist who has a particular skill set could review a paper. Often, the first chance you get is when your supervisor or someone is asked to review a paper and then hands it to you and said, you have a go. And then come back and we'll talk about it. And that means that you've learned one-on-one with your supervisor on what sort of comments to make, how to be constructive, and so on. So normally, if you're an author, you're also a referee. That's how it works, some give and take. So they're scientific experts, young, old, mid-career, doesn't matter. Typically 8 average per year. If you ask authors, if ever you've published a paper with Elsevier, you actually are asked to fill out an author survey, so-called author feedback survey. And if we ask these various people, what do you think about the various experience compared to any other paper you've published, then we look at it. And so the authors, this is a typical result. So the authors think that that's the most important, it's the least important. They're concerned about refereeing speed, refereeing standard, reputation. Impact factor can vary by journal. The audience is important, production speed is important, editor board, and so on. But the most important thing is refereeing speed and refereeing standard. That's about 60,000 authors surveyed. So that's certainly summing up what the authors think. If you're an author and a reviewer, of course, then that's fine. And why do reviewers review? For various reasons. This is a bit of humour, I don't know if you can read that down below. It says, most scientists regard the new streamlined peer review process as quite an improvement. So here you have some poor scientist going through with all the knives and the axes and everything to paper accepted. So that's how some authors, I think, sometimes think what happens when they said push this button, submit. This nasty process happens. It doesn't, but sometimes it feels like that. Reviewers review, sometimes for academic duty, sometimes because they get the latest information. because you then receive the material months before it's published. So it helps you in your own research. Most editorial board members go onto the journal after being useful, frequent, thorough reviewers. So if you review a lot for a journal, the chances of going onto the editorial board and getting the status of being on the board increase. And of course, it does help your own career because you're seeing different styles and writing, and as you teach, you also learn. So that's the idea. So again, the take-home lesson of this afternoon is the best reviewers should see themselves as teachers. And again, a distant friend. Not everyone is that good, I'm afraid. We have various systems of online peer review. In Elsevier we use something called the Elsevier Editorial System, EES. That will change soon to something different called EVs, but it's the same idea. And this online system can handle thousands and thousands and thousands of submissions, and each one's a different journal, and they've got information and links, and behind that is all the information reviewers, and the editors go into the system and choose referees, and so on. If you're asked to review, it might be a mistake. It might be you were not the right person. It could be you worked in one field and moved across to another field, and the editor has chosen you based on your previous work, which you don't know the recent developments. So as long as it's within your area, fine. If it's outside of your area, you can decline and say, I'm sorry, it's outside my area now is these keywords. And then the editor will probably add those keywords to your profile into EES rather than the old one. Also, if you're asked to review, remember I said it takes about 3 hours typically? It might take 4. If you cannot spare 4 hours, it's best to do it in one go before the deadline, which is typically 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Just decline and say, I'm sorry, I'm too busy, next time maybe. No one takes great offence at this. You're being honest. It's better to be honest, and then the other option is to agree and then not deliver for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something, and that poor author is waiting and waiting and waiting. If you have a conflict of interest which the editor or author didn't know about, again, you are morally and ethically obliged to tell the editor, thank you for suggesting me to be the peer review for this paper. However, as a conflict of interest, I must withdraw. If you want to explain why, you can. You don't have to. So here's a typical, I probably can't read that, you'll read it better when you get the PDF. But so here's the review of this particular, for this journal, and invitation to review. It reminds people what the journal's about in case you didn't know, specific reviewing instructions, and then the deadline. It's a very standard sort of reviewer invitation sent out by all various publishing houses worldwide. It's your job to be constructive, helpful, so that you have made that paper more readable. If it's more readable, your entire scientific field can benefit from that. And again, it doesn't help to be nasty and sarcastic. And also, if you're asked to review, you are giving recommendations. That could be if you recommend rejection and the other reviewer has recommended major revision, it might be the editor thinks, okay, 2 recommendations, I'll go with the major revision. You were asked to give a recommendation, not a decision. It's important to remember. So although it's just your responsibility, you don't have the final decision, which in some ways is better. We have, for example, reviewer guidelines, and there's various online training courses and all sorts of things that we're trying to develop, because we recognise not enough people do reviews because they don't know how. So how do you do it? The options I've been through already: reject because it's out of scope or poor quality, accept because it's amazing, or minor revision, major revision. The workflow is similar, but this is from a reviewer's point of view. Submitted, received, and then decides to review. The reviewers are assigned, accept invitation, reviews are completed. And then it goes into here, revision or accept, and background again, if it's major revision. So, general points: if you're not sure of anything, you're unsure, just ask the editor. Remember, it's confidential. You're not supposed to discuss it with anyone, particularly not the author. And your remarks should be constructive, and they should also take into account that some journals actually help you with little checklists about how original it was, is it structured properly, is it good English, does it cite the right material, are there any ethical problems? These are all there in some journals, many journals, which helps to guide you through the process. So here, for example, is a form. Is it for quality? Is the paper original? Is it original enough to warrant publication? Yes, no. If it's just sound but dull, boring, it goes somewhere else often. Can a paper be shortened? Because often papers are too long, they need to be shortened down. Is it sensible and logically lined up, which we've been through this morning? Again, reviewers are asked that. Is it a logical conclusion? Again, you should have done all this yourself as an author, so you get all the good things happening here. Now, a few other points. Some journals ask, does it lie in the top 25% of work in that particular referee's judgment? Top 50, bottom 50, bottom 25. So if it really is seen as high quality, should it be fast-tracked? If it's in the lower 25, why should it be published? These are all questions you're asked as a reviewer to help the editor to decide. And then the recommendation is here: publish as submitted, major, minor, or reject because. And detailed comments are in two different sorts. One is the ones that go to the author, ones that go to the editor. So for originality, you've got to say, is it novel enough? Does it add to the total knowledge? If there's lots of work out there, is it just in the middle, or is it actually raising the information level? Is there a particular question and answers? Is it good enough for the journal? That's where it gets interesting, because each journal has a different sort of standard. If you're a reviewer and you're asked to review a paper for Nature, and then a week's time you're asked to review a paper for the International Journal of Biological Macromolecules, impact factor 2.0, then you probably have to see it's a different quality level, and therefore you've got to somehow see and answer those questions about quality differently based on those two journals. Not everyone can publish everything in Nature quality continuously. Again, this top 25% idea. And literature scan review articles helps the reviewer. So if you did a scan, you might find some review articles which weren't even mentioned in the material, in which case you can suggest to the author that they include those ones, as it helps the reader eventually understand the field better. So again, you as a reviewer are asked to look at the structure. We went through the structure this morning. but many people don't know how to write papers, and so they don't do it properly. Now you know, which helps. But the idea of the IMRAD, title, abstract, introduction, and so on, is it that sequence? If not, what's wrong with it? Should things be changed around? And so you ask those things. Can you get suggestions for a better title maybe? Is the abstract correct? So all the things that I was asking you to think about, the editor is asking the reviewers to think about. So if you are ahead of the curve as an author and can answer all those questions yourself before it gets to the reviewer, you stand a better chance of being accepted. You can see with the other hat of a reviewer, change hats, you're now author, you can see it makes sense, what I was talking about this morning. Again, methodology, is it the correct method, well described? Is it appropriately described? Are the statistics correct in the results? Is the conclusion supported by the results? Is it reasonable? Does it contradict previous theories? And so that's all various suggestions which to help you judge the paper. Tables and figures. Are they relevant? Are they consistent? Is the caption length appropriate and long enough or not too long? You don't want to have 5 lines of caption under a figure. 1 or 2 lines is maximum. And do the figures describe the data properly? Because if the figure is not really appropriate, why is it there? These are all things that happen. Ethical problems, well, we have someone here who did some faking of research. And so sometimes the referees notice there's something not quite right there ethically, so they actually have an obligation to tell the editor, excuse me, I think there's something wrong with this paper. I think it's either plagiarized or it's fraud or there's something wrong with, because that institute couldn't possibly do this experiment. They don't have the equipment. So these sorts of things you can flag to an editor, and the editor and publisher together then sort out the ethical aspects. Again, as a referee, you're asked, is it clear, concise, good English? But you don't need to be a language editor. If your English third language, if it seems to read okay to you, that's okay. If things jar you when you read it, you know it's not okay. So, are the trade names, abbreviations, symbols appropriate? Are the tables too big? Can they be chopped down? Is everything clear and sharp? And then, of course, you have your confidential comments to the editors, editors. So this is information only the handling editor sees, not the author. That's recommendations, thoughts, concerns, and they stay in the system and they don't go to publishers even. They just go to the editors. And then the comments to the authors are you being a distant friend, saying, okay, here's my concern here, this needs to be done. Here's my concern here, add these references and it will make your paper stronger. Here, what do you mean by this? Can you explain it better? And in effect, you are helping that author. If you also are working in a lab and someone in your group is writing a paper and asks your opinion, it's the same set of things you're doing for that paper as if you're being a distant referee. You're helping that author with suggestions. And that's just what this is. So even you can try that to start getting used to the idea of refereeing. When someone asks your opinion, what do you think of this paper before I submit it? You could say, oh, it's fine. Or you could say, okay, I'll use this as a way to develop my skills as being a referee and help my colleague, the author. And that is a good way of starting out. And of course, your comments to the author has to match your comments to the editor. If your recommendation to the editor is, this is junk, it should be rejected, it's plagiarizing, and your comments to the author are, seems great. No, they have to be consistent, because the system, sometimes automatically, in some publishing houses, with ours it's cut and paste. The comments go to the author, comments go to the editor, and that helps the whole process. So when you do send your report to the editor, please be punctual, please be on time. Remember, when you are an author, how long those annoying referees take. Please remember that when you are asked to be a referee, and be as fast as you can while still being thorough. Many journals let you work online, a little post-it note electronically, so-called annotated PDFs. So you get the PDF of the author proof, and you can just type your comments in, and that's easier. It saves you having to open a Word file, type in the line number and your comments and the next line number. Some journals still do that, others don't. And of course, editors are getting lots and lots of these comments in, because say an ordinary journal gets in 500 papers, 1,000 papers a year, 2 or 3 peer reviews, so that's 2,000 or 3,000 article reviews coming in. And those 2,000 or 3,000 reviews come in at various times, and so you have to remind the editor a bit what's going on. So you can summarize the article at the top of your report. This article is about, in a few lines, 4 or 5 lines, why you think it's valuable or why you think it's not, or whatever. It should be comprehensive, explain your reasons, because you don't want to say, oh, this is trivial or this is minor. Explain why, specifically. Like, as in, previous material published covers this well, or whatever. You just have to be clear in why you're making this particular recommendation. And also, you've got to decide what is your own judgment and what is fact. So your own judgment will be, I think this is not particularly valuable, it's not cutting edge. And your comments based on data will be a list of references that have been missing and shows that there's already published material. And again, be nice. Be nice, be kind, constructive, be helpful. Be the distant friend. So here's an example. Sample paper comes in. This is a screenshot from EES. And then it's, we have here that the various reviewers, editor-in-chief, and all the various comments and things, that's all inside the system, which you don't see. The original submission is the major revision, further review required, that's the decision, or accept the minor, or revise, So let's just try again, that one. So that's the other one, is the accept in present form, accept or accept. It's all the various options you can do within EES. Reviewer submission, marked up all the various comments, and based on that, the editor then decides what to do. They normally wait for the second. If it's a delay because some reviewer is too slow, they might send it out to a third, or they might even look at it themselves because they're very aware that the author needs a good service. This is a reviewer checklist from this journal. All the various things there. So that, in effect, is a confidential checklist which the editor gets to see, and that again it's a way this journal has found to help in the peer review process. This is another one, another journal. Again, similar thing. On a scale of 1 to 5, what you rate the new knowledge, experimental design, evaluation of data, and so on. So you have here, again, another sort of form. So a lot of journals are trying to help guide the referees to do this. And the letter to the authors then says, here's what the comments are attached, and then this is basically a revision letter. Then in details, here's the various reviewer number 1 had this point, and so in your reply, you've actually, this is the point by point I was talking about. Each referee's question has an answer, point by point. Referee 1, point 1, answer 1. Referee 1, point 2, answer 2, and so on. Here you can see the author revised things and just changed this by the option in Word to see the changes, track changes, so you can see very clearly what's been done. Makes it easier for the referees to track changes, because as a referee you get to see the article again after revision to see what's been changed and how well it's been changed. And here's the final article, which was accepted. So, as a summary, peer review seems to be the best we have currently to judge what should be published in science. You should consider being a reviewer in some form or other, even if it's just helping colleagues with their papers that you're not involved with, just developing your reviewer skills. And with these notes, I hope that you've got a better idea about what a proper and thorough review is. Other things you've got to consider as a reviewer is you have what's called a privileged document status. You are sent this privately, confidentially. You're not supposed to discuss it, disclose it, use it even. Also, you've got to be competent. If you were sent it by mistake, you should say that. And again, you have this conflict of interest. If you are working on it, you have to decline. And if you see anything that's a bit ethically unsound, you're supposed to flag it to the attention of the editor-in-chief. So a privileged document, you're supposed to not contact the authors. It remains the property of the authors. And if you've printed it, you either should keep it confidential until it's a complaint and then destroy it. If you have shared the review with someone else, say a colleague has helped you or a junior has helped you or you've helped someone else, then you provide that second person's name to the editors. One is to show that you did actually share it with someone, but you are co-responsible for the review. So that is, you actually acting ethically by saying you've done this. And secondly, it's a way for the editors to know that someone else was involved with the review, and perhaps they can be used in the future on their own. So it's a way for a journal to develop good referee lists for these sorts of things. So I think I've covered all that already. Expertise, competence, conflict of interest, not allowed to plagiarize the data, or not even allowed to refer to it until it's published. Because in effect, you received it confidentially. You may have some alert set up in Science Direct or something, just so when it does get published, you know it, and you can then cite it. But until it's published, you cannot use the data. You cannot cite it, you cannot use it, you cannot even plagiarize it. You shouldn't do that ever. But what I'm saying is it's confidential. It's very interesting. And of course, if you see anything a bit dubious, it's the editor's job to follow up once you have flagged that. And that is the end as far as I'm concerned. And we're now, that's not so bad. We were supposed to finish at 15:15. And I'm actually 15:40. All right, okay. We had a long lunch, didn't we? So I know there's supposed to be questions and answers and the like, and
here we have